Representative from the 5th District of Oklahoma, Congressman Steve Russell.
He was born in Massachusetts to a family of strong religious conviction. His father, a businessman, served in local politics and later in the Massachusetts legislature. His thoughts were galvanized by his father's views on basic rights of individuals and the dangers of a government that would interfere with one's life, liberty, and property. Enrolling at Harvard, he pondered the ministry, law, or perhaps business, yet he could never quite escape the itch of politics. Graduating Harvard, he nearly became a lawyer like his cousin, but decided business would be more practical. Hired by a successful merchant who recognized his people skills, he soon lost his job after only a few months because of his vivid discussions about politics that interfered with the customers. A dreamer who often failed, it was not for want of determination, organization, or skill. He had just not found his niche. Noting this, his dad still encouraged him with a respectable loan to start a business of his own, which he mismanaged, and it came to nothing. He settled on working as a junior partner in his dad's business. In the course of this work, he became agitated at the abuses of government power. It was incomprehensible to him that government should get away with decisions that seemed to contradict constitutional rights. Something should be done. He began to scratch the itch of political life, initially becoming a tax official. When it would provide him a government job and steady income, he still had to come to grips with the aspects of the job. He refused to collect taxes from businesses that he deemed unable or undeserving of losing the fruit of their labor to government waste and abuse. Ultimately, he became liable for their back taxes and narrowly escaped charges by working out a settlement. For all his flaws, he had an easy, unselfish way with people. Even though he came from a family of some means, one observer noted that he was a man, quote, utterly uninterested in either making or possessing money, end quote. He was a great organizer. People were drawn to his simplicity and decency. He had a true compassion for people. Collecting his thoughts on individual rights and constitutional liberty, he began to share them with others. Friends and locals urged him to run for the legislature. Easily elected, the name of Samuel Adams was destined to become a lightning rod of thought and action. Sam was particularly annoyed at government encroachment and the affront of taxing without people's consent. When Great Britain violated the Massachusetts Bay Colony's charter by levying its citizens on sugar trade, he successfully argued that they had no right to tax fellow citizens who were not represented in Parliament. If their trade could be taxed, what next? Their lands? Their possessions? To do so would make them on par with foreign subjects. Britain relented on the Sugar Act, but held supreme the right to tax without making any representative concession. The government decided instead on a small tax that required stamps to be affixed to publications. Adams and Associates responded with organized protests, boycotts, and publicly voicing their concerns at assemblies. The more vocal elements carried it further with torchlit vigils by hanging effigies of politicians from a well-known tree. And some gave way to violence and ransacking of officials' homes, which Adams strongly opposed. At this critical juncture, Adams recognized he had a choice. There could only be so many torchlit vigils, hanging effigies from trees, and slanderous demonstrations against political leadership. They needed a better path. Sam turned to his friend John Hancock and to his cousin John Adams. They would use influence, persuasion, and their personal connections to others like Thomas, Ben, George, and Patrick to build their movement. But it was Sam that rallied them to correspond, organize, and unite on civil ideas of liberty until all those who might serve the public held similar views, enough with conviction. As a result, they would obtain their rights to life, liberty, and property with the levers of government, and were willing to sacrifice as a team to secure them. We would have no nation today without Samuel Adams' early agitation, it is true, but we would have no Constitution without his calmer demeanor, his wisdom to reach out to those who could better persuade than he, who could convert opinion, and who could get the job done. It is a lesson we should still learn from today. Our nation stands at an important juncture in the defense of our liberties. We see government divided among those who would use the labor of others to give to those who may not have as much, in contrast to those like us who would provide an environment where those not having as much can succeed by the fruit of their labor. One party stands for government solutions. Our party stands for we, the people. The party of Lincoln still has the most persuasive message. We also have oftentimes the most unpersuasive messengers. With passion, we make the case for small government, protected property, religious and individual liberty. Then we relish in thrashing each other while the opposition remains largely united. A single disagreement among ourselves invites scorn, ridicule, and vitriol. The same party that prides itself in safeguarding our Judeo-Christian foundations is also many times riven with hateful, cutting critique of our own members, with assaults on one's manhood or womanhood, their courage, and even the legitimacy of one's birth. One questions, what kind of candidate would it have to be before he or she found acceptance should we stand so divided? As my colleague Trey Gowdy is fond of saying, the only perfect man who ever lived lost an election to Barabbas. It is an observation we should take to heart. Prior to entering Congress, I spent most of my adult life as a soldier. As infantrymen, we had to rely on each other, even if we didn't always agree. Even when we thought there might be a better way to get the job done, even if we didn't like the mission that we had been assigned. We turned to each other and gathered strength knowing that we had each other's back. At times, we even had to rely on allies that had different motivations altogether, and sometimes even former enemies who were now our allies. Rather than parsing our differences, we focused on defeating our common foe. Among the soldiers serving with us the night that Saddam Hussein was captured was Ian Weichel and Mark Payne. Ian was part of a recon troop that scoured the orchard where we targeted 2 farms that we had hoped Saddam may be found. Mark Payne coordinated command information as a battle captain for our brigade commander, Colonel Jim Hickey. Little did these 2 soldiers know when they were roommates at West Point that they would be part of the forces that made history that night. Returning the next year with the same brigade, but now each of them in command of their own companies, Ian was killed in action, leading his troops in April of 2006. He left behind his wife, Wendy, and his young son, Jonathan, who was born on his first tour to Iraq. Those of us that served with him paid our respects as he was laid to rest in Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery. 6 months later, while ignoring the results of a roadside bomb and a concussion, Mark Payne disregarded his injuries to lead his troops in an operation in which he was killed by enemy gunfire. And so I made yet another trip to Arlington National Cemetery to pay my respects to a friend. As you go to Arlington, they have Section 60, where they lay the Iraq and Afghan fallen. And in there, they receive the casualties as they come. They make a row, they go to the end, they weave it back until a portion is filled. As we followed Mark's caisson out to his final resting place, we were stunned to see that he was going to be laid at the feet of his West Point roommate, Ian Weichel. Roommates at the academy, best friends in battle, and now together forever. After the burial, I wandered around our nation's capital trying to mentally process a great number of concerns. Everywhere the air was full of melancholy prophecy. Politicians on both sides of the aisle thumped their chests about the hopelessness of our warriors' mission. The leader of the Senate declared our endeavor lost, while others argued about expenditures. Hard to take. As I wandered around the Capitol Mall and I looked at bold buildings with deeply embedded carvings with slogans about the greatness of our country, I couldn't help but think at the time if maybe they had been chiseled there for stooges like me that still believed in the greatness of the United States of America. Distracted, I wandered into a glass and concrete structure and found this, the Wright Flyer at the National Air and Space Museum. As I wandered around it, it had kiosks, and on them they had explained how this was built. And I was introduced to a couple of people that always seemed to accompany hard work and innovation. The dynamic duo of the cynic and the critic. And there they were telling the Wright brothers it would never fly. Looking at it, it's hard to believe that it ever did, and that a tangle of wire and canvas and wood would struggle into the air. Hanging above me outside the gallery, a sturdier-looking craft with the bold name Spirit of St. Louis hung above me. What fascinated me about this craft is it had no forward-looking window, just a forward-looking pilot at the controls. But there they were back in the day with such encouraging words like, "You fool, you're going to die just like all of the others." What makes you think as a male pilot that you can do what World War aces have lost their lives in the attempt? You'll never get off the ground with the weight of all of that gasoline. You'll never stay awake. You can't do it alone. Rounding the corner to examine spacecraft, I pondered the physics of what to me looked like aluminum foil and wondered how it could sustain life in outer space. How was it that we found Americans foolish enough to believe that you could be strapped into a rocket containing 2,000 metric tons of fuel as it hurled you into space, broke apart by design, and then the last two stages would join together, separate. Astronauts would crawl through as it locked, unlocked. This craft would land on the moon upright. Astronauts would get out, plant a flag, pick up a few rocks, pop back up, find the other craft over the expanse of the orbit of the moon and redock with it. And then because of some scientist's theory, probably with pocket protector and pens and all of those sorts of things, he says, if you slingshot around the moon, the gravitational pull will send you at the Earth at thousands of miles an hour, and it will get you back at precisely the right place. And as they did, don't worry about the fiery atmosphere because it will slow you down. And we'll put little asbestos plates on the bottom, and that will protect you. And as you come hurling through the sky at hundreds of miles an hour, parachutes will deploy, and you'll land in the Pacific Ocean, and a helicopter will come find you. It sounds absurd. but it's exactly what we did. I'll never forget the night that my dad woke me up as a young boy, and he said, "Son, get up. I want you to see this. You'll remember it the rest of your life." And as I watched Neil Armstrong crawl down a ladder on a fuzzy black and white picture, I was struck about the giant American leap made for all mankind. But as you go back and look at the accounts of the day, there they are. What about the war on poverty? What about our domestic issues at home? Why are we wasting billions of dollars on this frivolous race with the Russians? Blah, blah, blah. I left the National Air and Space Museum that day inspired, and it dawned on me literally that day as a soldier that this nation has never been built on the labor and counsel of the cynic and the critic. Cynics and critics, soldiers of our generation, have had a belly full of them. Every monumental mission that our soldiers have been assigned since 9/11 has been accomplished. Overthrow the Taliban government, done. Kill or capture Osama bin Laden, shot between the eyes by the Navy SEALs. Defeat Saddam's army and overthrow his government, done. Kill or capture Saddam Hussein, captured in a hole, turned over to his own people, and hung like the tyrant he was. And we've done it with the prattle and obstructions of progressives, cynics, and critics who stood in our path to accommodate their political narrative as we sacrificed our sweat and our blood. After returning home from more than 2 decades of service, I have asked myself this question: how did we allow our voice to be co-opted by self-proclaimed cynics and critics on both sides of the aisle who have divided our great nation? When did American zeal for innovation, sweat, and determination become replaced with intimidation, threat, and extermination of meaningful discourse by pathetic keyboard commandos eating their bags of cheese puffs while sunken into their couches? America has never been built on that type of counsel or critique. Republicans, wake up. It's time to rekindle that spirit that united our country, ended enslavement, enriched our land, advanced our arts and sciences, granted women's suffrage, protested inequality, and protected the defenseless. That's the party of Lincoln, and it's still the party today. Republicans know this difference between good and evil. The question we must now ask ourselves is, will we unite to continue to live free, or continue to attack ourselves, give way to cynicism, and watch America's liberty and our place in the world die? Thank God America has men and women such as you and listening all over the nation today who still get it. You know it's not the cynic and critic that dig the ditch, teach the child, inspire the solutions, or create the future. Sacrifice is his stranger. Generosity is his bane. Unity is his enemy. It's time for Republicans to be Republicans again, to inspire, lead, unify, and sacrifice. It starts today with a few simple things that we can sacrifice. Sacrifice doubt, sacrifice anxiety, sacrifice cynicism. America cannot allow soldiers like us to come home from a decade of war to see our republic overcome by the self-indulgent, the divisive, and the visionless. And as visionary as we Republicans and lovers of liberty claim to be, we will make little headway if our only answers to our friends and neighbors are mere sideline snipes about what's wrong with this country as we attack our own. Are we so short-sighted and so shallow in our conviction that we cannot accommodate dialogue, exchange of ideas, show some deference, and rebuild this great nation? It's time to show the American people what's right with this country and not wrong with it, and get back to work. Any soldier knows you make use of the time you have, however small, and you never quit until the mission is accomplished. And if we want to honor the true heroes, that we will take time and pause, hopefully, during our Memorial Day weekend. Men like Ian Weichel and Mark Payne, who will not come home, who will never know the joys of marriage and raising children, who will never live to see their grandchildren while living in the freedom that their sacrifice purchased, then we must rebuild the America that they died for. The sum total of our lives is how we invest them in other people. And we, the people, the defenders of this great nation, have a responsibility to serve our God, our country, and give of our talents and efforts to preserve our freedoms. May you be such people. As you face the wind and look to the future, you will always have the naysayers, those around you that will take counsel of their fears. They will critique you and discourage you so that they will somehow feel better about their pathetic, sedentary lives. Do not heed their voices. They have nothing to say that we need to hear that builds, encourages, or inspires. Instead, stand true, take risks, lead, achieve. Ignore the calls of the cynic and the critic telling you it will never fly. And above all, keep the faith in this great country. Don't quit. God bless you all.